Hello AmericansChannel. This video is made by free videos from Storyblocks, and these images and video we use just for explanation, and it's free use also.
Jason and Emily arrived at the cabin just before sunset. It was small but cozy, tucked deep in the woods. A river flowed nearby, and the trees stretched tall around it. It was exactly what they wanted, a quiet retreat from their busy lives. Emily took a deep breath. "This is perfect," she said. Hikers take selfie after night in cabin, then notice a camera flash behind them. They carried their bags inside. The cabin smelled like musky wood and old books, but that was part of the charm. A fireplace stood against the far wall, with logs beside it. The only furniture was a worn-out couch, a wooden table, and a bed in the corner. It wasn't much, but it was what they wanted. It felt rustic but warm, and that was what they were looking for. Jason and Emily really wanted to experience nature in its purest. Randomly placing a tent in the woods was illegal in these parts, so this was the next best thing. Jason grinned. Home for the weekend. After unpacking, they decided to explore. The forest was peaceful, filled with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves. A small trail led them to a lake, its surface smooth like glass. Emily took a picture. "I could stay here forever," she said. Jason laughed. "Let's see how you feel after a night in the woods." This joking comment would prove to be a bit more significant than the couple expected at that point in time, because even during their first night in the wooden home, they experienced some things that did not contribute to their peaceful stay in the old forest cabin. Back at the cabin, Jason lit the fireplace while Emily made dinner. The flames flickered, casting shadows on the walls. They ate at the wooden table, talking about work, life, and future plans. Outside, the wind picked up, making the trees creak. "It's going to be a cold night," Jason said, tossing more wood into the fire. But the cold was the least of their concerns on this particular night. As they cleaned up, Emily noticed something strange. After dinner, they went to a nearby line of trees where they hung their clothes to dry, and when they arrived back at the timber home, they saw it. The cabin door was slightly open, but Emily was 100% sure she had closed it before they left. "Did you leave this open?" she asked. Jason shook his head. He walked over and shut it firmly. "Probably just the wind," he said. Emily nodded but felt uneasy. And the strange occurrences only got worse from there. That night, they climbed into bed, listening to the sounds of the forest outside. Owls hooted in the distance, and the wind howled outside. Jason fell asleep quickly, but Emily lay awake. She swore she heard something. Soft footsteps on the porch. Emily held her breath, listening as she heard the steps circling the cabin. Then silence. Maybe it was an animal. Emily grinned and whispered mocking words to herself, saying she was sicking herself out over nothing. A city girl out in the woods. "Get a grip, you wimp," she said before dozing off to sleep. But then, suddenly, a loud thud jolted Emily awake. She sat up, heart pounding. Jason stirred beside her, also hearing the sound. "What was that?" he mumbled sleepily. Emily strained her ears. The fire had burned low, leaving the room in shadows. It seemed quiet for a second, but then another thump. It sounded like something was hitting the wall outside. "Probably a raccoon," Jason muttered, rolling over. Clearly, Jason wasn't as impressed by the weird noises of the woods, but Emily wasn't satisfied by the hypothesis of her boyfriend. A raccoon, yeah, right. Must be the biggest raccoon in the world then. Emily wasn't so sure. She got up and peeked through the window. The forest outside was pitch dark. The trees swayed in the wind, but she saw nothing unusual. Still, she locked the window just in case. Jason was already snoring. Taking a deep breath, Emily climbed back into bed and pulled the blankets tight. At some point, she drifted off. But the night was restless. She dreamed of whispering voices and the feeling of being watched. She woke up once, certain someone was standing at the foot of the bed, only to find the room empty. Her heart raced as she forced herself back to sleep. And Jason wasn't spared from the strange occurrences either that night. In the early morning hours, Jason woke up to use the bathroom. He tiptoed across the wooden floor, trying not to wake Emily. As he reached the bathroom door, he stopped. Something felt off. He had the odd sensation that someone had just been inside the bathroom. He stepped forward and looked at a fogged-up mirror above the sink. It was like somebody had just taken a shower in there, since the mirror was so blurred out that Jason couldn't even see the reflection of his face. But that was impossible. They were alone in this forest, miles removed from civilization. Jason did his best to ignore the feeling. After washing his hands, he hurried back to bed, shivering as he climbed under the covers. The room felt colder than before. He wrapped an arm around Emily and tried to sleep, but it took a long time. Every little sound made him tense. Every sound Jason heard made his heart skip a beat from that point forward. He told himself it was the cabin settling, just the old wood shifting. And whenever he heard something off, he found another logical explanation for the occurrences around them. Sleep finally took over after about an hour. A short night of sleep later, morning light streamed through the small windows. Birds chirped outside, welcoming the new day. Jason woke first, rubbing his eyes. Emily groaned and stretched beside him. They had survived their first night in the cabin. Neither of them spoke about the strange noises. Maybe it had all been in their heads. The fire had long since died out, leaving only the sound of the forest. They had no idea what the day would bring, but one thing was certain. This adventure was long from over, and it would only get more bizarre. The young, unassuming couple just didn't know it yet. Jason and Emily shook off their exhaustion, determined to enjoy the day. They packed their hiking gear, water bottles, snacks, and a first aid kit. The sky was clear, the air fresh. Emily forced a smile. "It's going to be a great day," she said. Jason nodded, though last night still lingered in his mind. They ate a quick breakfast, sitting on the cabin's small porch. Birds chirped, and the river's soft gurgle filled the silence between them. Neither spoke about the strange events. "Fresh start," Jason finally said, forcing a grin. Emily nodded, taking a deep breath. They needed to focus on the beauty around them. After gathering everything, they stepped off the porch, ready to go. Emily adjusted her backpack straps while Jason checked the map. They planned to hike toward a scenic overlook a few miles away. "One last thing before we leave," Emily said, pulling out their camera. "Let's take a picture with the cabin." They stood in front of the rustic wooden structure, forcing relaxed smiles. Emily held up the camera and snapped the photo. She checked the screen, expecting a simple picture of them with the cozy cabin in the background. But instead, her stomach twisted when she looked at the result. When the camera was turned and they looked at the snapped photo together, they saw it instantly. There, in the open doorway, was something they hadn't expected. A faint light, like the flash of another camera, reflected in the darkness of the cabin's entrance. Emily's breath caught. "Jason, look at this." She tapped her finger on the screen at the position where the flash behind them was seen. But Jason was already aware, and his face was just as pale as that of his girlfriend. "What the hell?" he whispered. It was impossible. The only people in this wood were they. So that also meant that a second camera flash in this picture should not have been possible, but something, had taken a picture. Emily's hands shook as she zoomed in, still afraid to look behind her and stare at the actual door. This was not a natural anomaly that could be debunked. This was an artificial camera flash. It was unmistakable, But that meant someone was in the cabin, right now, watching them, taking pictures of them. The realization sent a cold shiver down her spine. Her breath came in quick gasps. Jason. What do we do? Jason clenched his jaw, his hands tightening into fists. His first instinct was to protect Emily. He turned to face the cabin, his muscles tensed. Stay here, he ordered. Emily barely heard him. Her mind was spinning, fear gripping her chest. Jason, wait! She pleaded, but he was already moving toward the cabin. Jason grabbed the selfie stick and unclipped the camera from it. He figured he could use the long steel part as a weapon against whatever was inside that cabin waiting for him. Jason didn't stop to think. His body acted on pure adrenaline. If someone was inside, they wouldn't get away with scaring them like this. Jason's feet pounded against the ground as he sprinted forward, each step bringing him closer to the scary unknown entity inside that cabin. We were right. Someone must have been inside that place with us last night. Jason was done rationalizing nerves. This was real. Emily could only watch as Jason charged ahead. Fear screamed at her to run, to get as far away as possible, but she couldn't leave him. She stood frozen, her heart unable to slow down its rhythm. The forest around her suddenly felt claustrophobic, as if it too was waiting to see what would happen. Jason reached the porch in 2 long strides. His breath was fast, his palms slick with sweat. The door was still open, the inside dark and unreadable since they had already turned off all the lights. He regretted it very much at this moment, since a bit of light would make this moment a lot less scary. Jason could feel something. Someone watching him as he peeked inside. He hesitated a moment before gripping the doorframe, ready to step inside. And when he did so with a large step, instantly ending up in the middle of the open space. It was dark, and Jason needed his phone's flashlight to see his surroundings. The air inside the cabin felt colder than just 10 minutes ago. Jason squinted into the dim space, his grip tightening on the selfie stick. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice sharp and unwavering. But there was no answer. The only response was the wind that blew against the outer wall. But Jason knew he wasn't alone. Emily hovered near the trees, unable to move closer but unable to look away. She held the camera against her chest like a lifeline. Her fingers clenched around it. Every muscle in her body screamed at her to run, but she couldn't. "Jason," she whispered, though he was already too far to hear. To give herself some sense that she was helpful in this situation, she used that same camera to navigate her surroundings. She looked around to see if anything notably happened on the outside of the cabin, and every few seconds she snapped a picture, just to be sure. And this action would prove a very smart move just moments later. While Emily did her stationary surveillance outside, Jason took another step forward inside the cabin. His body was on high alert. His eyes darted around the small space, searching for any sign of movement. The cabin looked the same as they had left it, except for one thing. The bathroom door was ajar. It had been closed when they left. Jason made sure it himself after last night's foggy mirror incident. His stomach turned as he walked toward the slightly open door. The realization made Jason's breath hitch. Someone had been in there. Maybe they still were. His grip on the selfie stick tightened as he moved toward the slightly open door. Every step echoed in his ears, his heartbeat pounding like a drum. He reached the threshold, then hesitated, listening. Emily couldn't take it anymore at that point. She forced her legs to move, stepping cautiously toward the porch. She couldn't leave Jason alone in there. If something happened to him, she would never forgive herself. "Jason," she called softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Jason reached out and nudged the bathroom door open with the selfie stick. The hinges creaked, the sound unnervingly loud in the quiet cabin. His eyes were just about ready to look into the scary room when Jason heard Emily screaming outside. "Jason, Jason, come quickly now." Jason left the room instantly. His girlfriend was in trouble, and he had to go out and save her from whatever caused her distress. Jason bolted out of the bathroom's doorframe and ran out of the cabin toward the screaming Emily. When he saw Emily again, she was pointing somewhere. "What is it? What is it?" Jason asked as he arrived next to Emily, but Emily was mute for like a full minute before she could finally utter a single word. "There was a man. He came from a side door in the cabin and ran outside," Emily explained while pointing her finger toward that side door. The man was long gone by the time Jason arrived, but Emily did manage to snap a picture of him. They saw a rugged-looking man. Jason estimated that he was in his late 50s. He wore dark blue denim cargo pants and a yellow jacket. What the hell was he doing inside our cabin? Jason and Emily stared at the photograph, their minds racing. The man had been inside their cabin, watching, hiding. "We need to figure out who he is and what he wants," Jason said. Emily nodded, though fear still clung to her. They turned back toward the cabin, determined to find out what was really going on. Slowly, they stepped inside again. The air felt different now, heavier, filled with lingering tension. Jason scanned the room, looking for anything unusual. His eyes landed on a section of the wall near the kitchen. A cabinet was positioned oddly there, indicating that it was recently moved. "Help me move this," he told Emily. Together, they shoved the heavy cabinet aside. As it scraped against the wooden floor, a hidden door was revealed. Jason exhaled sharply. "No wonder we never saw it." Emily touched the doorknob, hesitating. It was slightly ajar. Someone had left in a hurry. On the outer wall, thick bushes had concealed the entrance, making it invisible from the outside. Jason stepped through first, his grip tightening on the selfie stick. The small, narrow doorway led outside, its path covered by overgrown branches. It was the perfect escape route. Nobody would have known that this doorway was there. Emily shuddered. He could have been watching us the entire time. Jason nodded grimly. "We need to check the rest of the cabin and find clues as to why this man was here." It felt like the only logical thing to do. By now, the mysterious individual was long gone, and they were not near a police station, so they had to get their answers. They searched every corner, overturning furniture and checking under the bed. The stranger had been here, but why? "It's like he was living here," Emily muttered. Jason's gut twisted. He knew she was right. Someone had been using this place, and they had unknowingly taken over his home for the weekend. The thought made Jason uneasy, but he pushed forward. He hadn't forgotten about the bathroom, the place he was about to check before Emily's scream. "Come on," he said, leading the way. As they entered, they immediately saw it. The mirror was fogged up again, just like the night before. Emily's stomach turned. She pointed at the glass. Something was written on it. The writing was done with fingers making movements through the fogged-up material. Jason stepped forward, exhaling his breath against the mirror to make the letters clearer. Slowly, readable words formed on surface, written in streaky finger marks. Emily's breath caught in her throat as Jason read them aloud. "This is my cabin," were the first words written on the foggy mirror. Emily clutched Jason's arm. "He thinks we're trespassing. We rented this cabin from a traveling company. If anyone is trespassing, it's him," Emily said bluntly. Jason kept reading. "You are trespassers. Please let me be, or help me bring justice. For answers, come to the waterfall." A chill ran down his spine. The message provided more questions than answers. "What does that mean?" Emily whispered. Jason shook his head. "I don't know, but I don't like it." They stood in stunned silence, processing the eerie message. "He wants us to meet him," Emily said, her voice uneasy. Jason frowned. "Or he's trying to scare us away." Emily didn't know which was worse. Either way, the man had been inside their cabin just moments ago, which didn't sit well. Jason turned away from the mirror, his mind racing. There had to be more clues. He scanned the small space, his eyes landing on the washer and dryer against the far wall. They were tilted just as the cabinet was. It's funny how things become so crystal clear once you know what to look for. "Help me move these," Jason said, already gripping the edge of the washer. Emily hesitated, but helped push together with her determined boyfriend. The machines groaned as they slid across the rough wooden floor, and when they were fully pushed toward one side, they saw it. With the washer and dryer gone, they saw an empty space behind it. It wasn't large, about 3 by 4 feet, but it was large enough to hold a hidden hatch in the floor beneath them. Jason's heart pounded. "What the hell?" Emily gasped. Dust covered the edges, but the handle was clean. Someone had been using it. Jason crouched and pulled open the hatch. When he did, a cold, damp smell wafted up. The small space beneath was dark, but they could see enough to identify items in the cabin's crawlspace. But just to make things easier, Jason shone his flashlight into the hole. There was a thin, dirty mattress down there. It had stains on there, and it had soaked up the most woodland air. Around the mattress lay many crumpled food wrappers and a half-empty water bottle. Emily covered her mouth. "Oh my God, he slept here," she whispered, horror creeping into her voice. Jason's stomach clenched. The stranger hadn't just been passing through. He had been living beneath their feet. He was here the entire time. Jason muttered, shaking his head. Emily backed away, her hands trembling. The idea that the man had been directly below them while they slept made her skin crawl. Jason exhaled sharply, staring at the hidden space. We weren't alone. Not even for a second. The couple wanted answers to all the burning questions in their minds. So even though they were afraid, they listened to the mysterious man's request and went out to search for the waterfall. The couple nervously joked as they left the cabin for a second time. They went out into the woods to look for adventure, and in a way, they got what they asked for. "All right, you have everything. Even the knife," Jason asked his trembling girlfriend. Emily shook her head as she did a final check of her backpack. Jason and Emily left the cabin, their nerves on edge. They followed the rough trail, stepping over fallen branches and damp leaves. The trees stretched high above them, blocking most of the sky. Jason checked the map on his phone. "Shouldn't be too far," he muttered. Emily nodded, gripping her backpack straps tightly. They walked in silence, listening to the soft sounds of the forest. Birds chirped in the distance as the faint trickle of running water grew louder. "We must be close," Emily said. The anticipation made her stomach twist. Jason kept a steady pace, his eyes scanning for anything unusual. "Just stay alert," he warned. Minutes later, they reached the waterfall. The water cascaded down jagged rocks, splashing into a deep, clear pool below. Mist hovered above the surface, cooling the air around them. "Wow," Emily whispered, momentarily distracted by the beauty. Jason took a deep breath. "All right, we're here." "Now what?" He scanned the area suspiciously. They stood at the edge of the pond, unsure of what to do next. The only sounds were the rushing water and their own breathing. "Do we just wait?" Emily asked. Jason frowned. He said to come here, but he didn't say what would happen after that. The uncertainty made his stomach churn. Emily sighed and glanced around, her eyes moving over the rocks and trees. "Maybe there's something we're supposed to find," she said. Jason shrugged. Worth a shot. They split up, circling the pond carefully. Emily walked slowly, her fingers brushing against damp moss on the rocks. Then she saw it. Something odd. A narrow space was hidden behind the waterfall, partially concealed by shadows and slippery rocks. Emily's heart skipped a beat. Jason! She called, waving him over. Jason hurried to her side, following her gaze. That's definitely not just a rock wall, he muttered. The space looked just big enough for someone to slip through. Jason reached out, running his fingers along the edge of the opening. The stone was damp but smooth, as if it had been touched many times before. It leads somewhere, he said. Emily swallowed hard. Do we go in? Her voice was uncertain, but curiosity burned in her eyes. Jason hesitated. I think we have to. Taking a deep breath, Jason stepped forward, carefully moving behind the waterfall. The rush of water roared in his ears as he squeezed through the opening. Emily followed closely, her heart hammering in her chest. As they emerged on the other side, they found themselves at the mouth of a dark cave. The entrance yawned before them, the air damp and heavy. Jason pulled out his phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing rocky walls that stretched deep into the cave system. Emily shivered. This is beyond sketchy, she muttered. Yeah, but we're already here. Their footsteps echoed as they moved forward. The walls narrowed slightly before opening into a wider passage. Jason glanced over his shoulder. If he's in here, we need to find him before he finds us. Emily nodded, gripping her pocket knife tightly. I don't like being at a disadvantage, she admitted. Jason called out, his voice bouncing off the cave walls. Hello. We're here. You left us a message. His words disappeared into the darkness. No response. Emily's breath quickened. Maybe he's not here. Jason frowned. Or maybe he doesn't want to be found. The thought sent a chill through both of them. They kept moving, their senses on high alert. The cave smelled earthy, like damp stone and decaying leaves. Jason's flashlight flickered slightly, but he tapped it, and the beam held steady. Emily ran her fingers along the wall, feeling grooves and scratches. Someone's been through here before, she whispered. The passageway curved, and suddenly the space widened again. Jason and Emily stopped, straining to listen. The sound of dripping water filled the silence. Jason swallowed hard. This place is bigger than I thought. Emily nodded, gripping his arm. What if this is a trap? Her voice trembled slightly. Jason didn't answer. His eyes swept over the cavern, searching for movement. If the man was here, he was staying quiet. Too quiet. Emily licked her lips, her pulse racing. I hate this, she admitted. Jason squeezed her hand reassuringly. Just stay close. They kept moving, step by cautious step. The deeper they went, the colder it became. Emily's breath came out in visible puffs. The air felt thick, heavy, like it was pressing in on them. Jason cleared his throat. If he wanted to attack us, he would have done it by now. His voice was low, careful. Emily nodded, but she wasn't convinced. Jason called out again, his voice steady. We just want answers. You left us a message. We came to talk. Again, silence. Emily's grip on her knife tightened. Her eyes darted around, scanning every shadow. Jason exhaled sharply. Maybe this was a mistake. Emily bit her lip. What if he jumps us? Right after Emily spoke those words, the rugged men moved out of the shadows and into the light of Jason's flashlight. Stay right there, Jason shouted as Emily pulled the knife from its holster and dangled it in front of her. They were both very nervous, but the man's demeanor was calm and collected. The man walked toward them with his hands in a submissive position. Put the weapons away, people. You no harm. Let's talk this out like adults. Emily and Jason listened instinctively, but remained on their guard as the rugged man sat down on a large boulder. Come, "Sit beside me," he suggested. Jason and Emily remained cautious, but something about the man's voice made them lower their guards slightly. He sighed and ran a hand through his unkempt hair. "My name is Kevin. I never wanted to scare you," he admitted. "I was just trying to make sure no one stayed in that cabin long enough to get comfortable." Jason frowned. "But why? You were living there. Why not just tell people to leave?" Kevin let out a bitter chuckle. "You think people would just listen, that they'd believe some random guy claiming the cabin was his?" He shook his head. "They don't. So I had to make them afraid. I have to stop them from coming all together." Emily glanced at Jason, then back at Kevin. "But why go through all that trouble?" she asked. Kevin's jaw tightened. "Because it's mine," he said firmly. "That cabin was my mother's, my family's, and it was stolen from us because of my father's greed." His voice carried years of resentment. Jason and Emily exchanged a look. "Stolen," Jason repeated. Kevin nodded. "My father, he cheated on my mother, then left her for another woman. She didn't have much, but the cabin and the land it was on were hers, passed down from her side of the family. He knew that." Kevin's hands clenched into fists. "When they divorced, he made sure to slip in a clause. The wording was small, and my mother didn't catch it when she signed. It transferred ownership of the land to him. She fought for years to get it back, and she almost won." Emily leaned in, listening closely. Almost. Kevin let out a weary sigh. She kept the cabin, but he kept pushing. It was an endless battle. When she passed away, he wasted no time. He started renting it out, making money off it, as if she had never fought at all. Jason's stomach twisted. "So that's why you're here," he realized. Kevin nodded. "It's my home. It's the only thing left of my mother, and I won't let him take it. But I'm just one man. I don't have the power or the money to fight him legal." His voice was heavy with frustration. Emily's heart ached for him. "So you scare off visitors," she said softly. Kevin gave a tired smile. "Yeah, if the place gets a bad reputation, people will stop coming. If no one rents it, maybe my father will finally give up. But he's stubborn and he's not giving in." Jason exhaled. "And now you want us to help." Kevin hesitated, then nodded. "I don't know how much you can do, but the more people spread the word, the more chance there is that truth will come out. Please, please, the word about what he's doing." His eyes darkened. "I can't fight him alone anymore." Jason ran a hand over his face. "This is a lot," he admitted. "We just came here for a weekend in nature." Kevin's expression softened. "I know, and I'm sorry. But you seem like good people. And if you really care about justice, you'll help." His voice was quiet, pleading. Emily and Jason locked eyes. They had been through enough strange occurrences in the last 24 hours to know Kevin was telling the truth. He wasn't a ghost, a murderer, or a lunatic. He was just a man trying to keep his home. And that struck a chord with both of them. "We'll help," Emily said before she even realized she had made the decision. Jason hesitated, but after a moment he nodded. "Yeah," he agreed. "I'm a journalist. I write for one of the biggest papers in the city. If I tell this story, people will listen." Kevin's eyes widened in hope. "You'd really do that?" Kevin asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jason nodded firmly. "Yeah, but we need proof. We need records, documents, anything that shows what your father did." Kevin stood quickly. "I have everything. My mother kept it all. It's in a safe spot. I can get it." Jason and Emily stood as well, shaking off the fear that had held them hostage for so long. Kevin extended a hand. Jason took it, shaking firmly. "Thank you," Kevin said sincerely, "for listening, for believing me." Emily gave a small smile. No one deserves to lose their home like this. They left the cave together, walking back through the forest. Kevin led them to an old shed behind the cabin, where he retrieved a bundle of documents. They looked over them briefly, enough to know Kevin's story checked out. "This is enough," Jason confirmed. "This will expose him." The next morning, Jason and Emily packed up early, saying goodbye to Kevin. They left the cabin in his hands, making sure no one else would take it from him. Jason wasted no time. As soon as they returned home, he wrote an exposé revealing the truth behind Kevin's stolen home. The article went viral, and people were outraged. Kevin's father, under immense pressure and accusations of fraud and tax evasion, which were also in the documents Kevin had, finally relented. To avoid further scandal, he surrendered his claim on the land. Kevin was officially returned the cabin, his home, and his mother's legacy. Justice had finally been served. Weeks later, Jason and Emily received a letter. It was from Kevin. Inside was a simple note, "Thank you, I'm home." Along with it was a picture. Kevin standing in front of the cabin smiling. For the first time in years, he was at peace. Jason and Emily smiled. They had done the right thing.